Consideration is the central concept in the common law of contracts, and it's required in the most cases for a contract to be enforceable. Consideration is the price one pays for another promise. It can be taken in various forms: money, property, a promise, making an act, or even refraining from performing an act. Generally speaking, if one agrees to do something otherwise that person was not legally obligated to do, it can be said that that person has realized it. Elements of consideration. First, it's a performance or a return promise must be bargained for. And second, it's a performance or return promise, it's bargained for if it's sought by the promisor in exchange for his promise and is given by the promisee in exchange for that promise. I know it's kind of confused. Consideration items. In order to meet the consideration items, in order to meet the exam requirements, a contract must meet three elements. First of all, there must be a bargain in terms of trade. Second, there must be a mutual exchange. And in other words, both parties must profit for the contract. And third, the exchange must be something of value. An example could be rental apartments. The landlord and tenant meet to discuss the terms or the exchange. Most of the time, the finance lease, money. Thus, they have fulfilled the first consideration requirement. To fulfill the second element, there must be a mutual exchange. In this case, the landlord provides housing while the tenant provides rents or money. Third, the terms of the trade must be valued. The apartment is worthy of the tenant hands each month. Therefore, this contract has fulfilled the requirement of the consideration because it fits all the elements of consideration. Exceptions to the consideration requirement. Modern contract theory has also allowed remedies in alternative theories such as promising dismissal. Also, modification to existing lease agreement as opposed to create a new lease do not require consideration. 1. Nor do modifications to existing sale contracts in addition to promising to perform an obligation moral. It's the classic example of a promise to support an injured person while rescuing the promisor. It's enforceable as long as the promisee was harmed in conferring a benefit on the promisor and the promisee is not disproportionate to the benefit. The promisee to pay a debt discharged by bankruptcy. The promisee to perform a conditional liability despite the non-currency of the condition, and the promisee to perform a biodable contract form a category of moral obligations that can be attached in the absence of a consideration. What is past consideration? In terms of a contract, past consideration it's used to mean a promise or an act that was made or performed prior to a contract. Past consideration typically comes into play when someone is trying to enforce a new promise. When a new contract is written, past consideration will not count as consideration for the purposes of the contract. The reason for this is that past consideration occurred before the new contract was entered, meaning it could not have been provided for the new contract. Past consideration cannot be included in a contract mostly because it didn't benefit the promisor or pose any risk to the promisee. For a contract to be valid, it absolutely must include consideration. In a two-person contract, for example, both parties involved must promise something, whether it's a specific act or an agreement to pay a certain amount of money. Past consideration usually occurs when someone has a moral obligation to perform a duty for someone else. This obligation, however, is almost never legally required. It is for this reason that past consideration can also be called moral consideration. What is accord and satisfaction? An accord and satisfaction is a legal contract where by two parties agree to discharge a tort claim, contract, or other liability for amount based on the terms that differ from the original amount of the contract or claim. Accord and satisfaction is also used to settle legal claims prior to bring them to court. The accord is the agreement on the new terms of the contract, and the satisfaction is the performance of those terms according to the agreement. When there is an accord and satisfaction, and the performance or satisfaction has been executed, all prior claims relating to the matter and extinguished. If for some reason company A doesn't deliver on the new terms, it might be liable for the original contract because it didn't satisfy the terms of the accord. I don't know how to pronounce that. I'm sorry. An accord and satisfaction does not replace the original contract. Rather, it suspends the contract's ability to be enforced, provided that terms of the accord satisfied as agreed upon. For example, a house owner hires a contractor to renovate their kitchen for $30,000. The contract requires a $12,000 down payment and $10,000 paid during the renovation process, and the remaining it's $8,000. $8,000 to be paid upon completion of the kitchen. However, when the kitchen is complete, the homeowner finds the work shoddy and he refuses to pay. An accord and satisfaction can be reached whereby the homeowner agrees to pay $3,000. Essentially, they are getting a discount on the price of the should-be constructor kitchen in return for giving up their right to sue. The contractor is paying $5,000 in order to avoid being sued by the homeowner and gives up the right to sue for the full $8,000. Both parties give something up to limit their downside liability. Modification of contract. Service contract and in the United States and other contracts are not governed by the Uniform Commercial Code. They generally require consideration in modified contract, thus called the pre-existing duty rule.